My name is Trisha Worrell. I'm one of the Assistant Directors of Outreach and Recruitment here at the Knauss School of Business, and I recruit for our Master's in Finance program. And I am joined here today by Dr. Melina Vosse, who is one of our Assistant Professors of Finance here at the Knauss School of Business. This session today is titled Women in Finance, How to Forge Your Own Path in a Male-Dominated Industry. I'm so excited to have this conversation with Melina here. Before we begin, just a quick note that we will be having a Q&A session towards the end. So feel free to just post your questions in the chat and we'll have some time at the end to address them. But with that said, Melina, thank you so much for being here. To start, would you like to introduce yourself? And could you tell us a little bit about your background and what led you to pursue a career in finance?
Sure, yeah. So first of all, thank you for inviting me to speak at this event. I think it's a really important thing to have a conversation about being a woman in a field with a bunch of men, and it can be really difficult. So hopefully I can say something that is of use to the people who are listening to the webinar. So really an honor to be here and excited to have a conversation and talk about all the fun stuff and not so fun stuff about being a woman in finance. So a bit about my background. It My journey into finance kind of happened a bit by chance. So growing up, I grew up in a small town in Ohio, your typical middle class family. My dad worked at a software company. Um, my mom was a stay-at-home mom and just really kind of classic American upbringing. No exposure to like the big city finance world. I didn't even think about going into finance when I was growing up. So from then I wanted to, as a high achieving student, I wanted to go to med school. That was like the thing all the smart kids wanted to do. So that was the plan. And I decided to go to the University of Miami because I had family down there and I had scholarships. So just not a very strategic choice, but that's the where I decided to go. And then on that med school track, I heard some advice that, well, a lot of the med schools like to see non-traditional majors. So I thought maybe as a practical decision as well as to get a major or just declare my major in business. So if med school didn't pan out, I could, get a job in business somewhere. I felt like that was a pretty safe bet. So I kind of just found myself in the business school and I had to pick a major and maybe a little bit driven by ego and some driven by practicality. I chose finance. So lots of jobs in finance, probably going to pay well. And, finance is the industry that holds the keys to progress and the money and all that stuff in the modern world. So that was kind of my incentive to just choose finance. Not a very educated guess at the time. But I declared my major in finance and took some classes. And I remember my first finance class, it was like such a foreign environment. I felt so out of place, all these words and terminologies that I had not experienced before. It was just a totally new world. But after I kind of got more comfortable and learned about what finance actually was, I became really interested in it. So I'm really interested in figuring out how to solve puzzles and understanding how the world works. And finance was a big part of understanding that puzzle. So I just dove in and got really excited. And then as I kind of grew in my understanding of finance, I um, I got involved in research. So there was like financial decision making, consumer decision making research at Miami. Um, so I reached out to one of the people leading the studies there. And so I just kind of, not by chance, a little bit by chance, but dipped my toe in the research and then got more interested there and then decided to shift away from the med school path and found out that finance was the topic that was more fulfilling to me. And I felt that it engaged me more and I was just more inspired to pursue these types of ideas instead of going down the route that I had previously planned. So yeah, then I applied to the PhD program in finance and just continued the journey through academia. Over the course of the PhD program, I got involved with industry, so working with some consultants, working with a bunch of various fields, so financial consulting, some private equity, some capital markets broker people. So a little bit of a taste of everything throughout that process. And then decided to go full on into academia after the PhD program, and we're here.
Awesome. Well, yeah, that experience sounds like a bit of a whirlwind. You're thinking med school and you kind of have like this pivot, but to further your academia, get your PhD. So like as we know, finance is a dynamic and a competitive field. So when you were first starting out, Melina, what were some of the biggest challenges that you faced?
Um, I think just getting comfortable with finance as a language. So getting started, like first off in these early classes, I felt lost for a very long time with the professors speaking in financial terminology. I didn't know what equities were and leverage and capital markets and like all of these things. So it felt like I was a bit behind the curve and just trying to keep up and understanding what was going on. So I wasn't really able to, at least in the beginning, focus in and form opinions, and I wasn't able to like ask meaningful questions back then. It felt more like a game of catch up. Um, and it's a very long game of catch up. But eventually I got a little bit more comfortable, and even in the beginning of the PhD program, I still felt like more new ideas and terminology and topics were coming up, and just constantly feeling like there's so much that I didn't know. Um, so I think that really fed into my imposter syndrome, which talking to a lot of other women in finance and in other fields, it's quite common, imposter syndrome. So the feeling like you don't belong and your ideas aren't valid and what you're asking or your opinions aren't meaningful, or maybe you're stupid or something. So a lot of imposter syndrome early on. I think that was the biggest underlying challenge that I faced. So with that, it was like still not feeling confident, just sitting in the classes, learning, like shadowing these people, but just being an observer, not really actively engaging in stuff and building my reputation and becoming a part of things. So for a long time, I was just kind of in the background and absorbing and afraid to ask questions. So that took me quite a while to come out of. Just my personality. I'm also quite shy. So it's like battling on two fronts. So overcoming my shyness and overcoming feeling like I don't know what's going on and being comfortable enough to ask questions. So I think that was a huge challenge for me in the beginning. Um,
Mhm. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
yeah, no, that's it. I just wish I asked more questions.
Oh yeah. So I mean,
Yeah.
honestly, I feel like we hear about imposter syndrome a lot, especially as women in, important careers. Did you have any mentors or role models who kind of influenced your journey, who have maybe experienced this, and have had a bit more tenure in these roles that kind of, helped influence your journey? And how did they kind of help shape your career path?
Yeah. So like I've been listening to podcasts, and almost all of the people who have successful careers and lives are like, I had this mentor. So mentorship is super important, and I was lucky enough to have a mentor. So I found her, I think it was junior years when I reached out to try to get involved in research. So at Miami, there was a neurofinance lab. So I was interested in like, the sciences and a bit of finance, and this seemed like an amazing thing. I think my mom found like an advertisement in a magazine somewhere. So she sent me this, and it ended up being Dr. Milika Mormon. She was a finance professor at Miami. So I reached out to her to try to get involved in the neurofinance lab projects. And she was nice enough to take me on and teach me about what she was working on, and eventually helping me, like guiding me through the choice to pursue the PhD. Should I go academia? Should I go industry? And so she was very, I don't know, I could tell that looking back on it, she put a lot of effort into trying to help guide me, which I appreciate now. Maybe I didn't appreciate much at the time. So she was definitely a role model as well, not just someone that's there trying to help guide me and figure out what to do with my life. But I thought she was just like a really cool person. She was younger, so I felt like I could relate to her. I thought she was like super intelligent, super cool. She was very direct, so I was drawn to her personality, and I looked and I kind of observed her when she would present her work or when she would ask questions in seminars. And I really respected how she held herself and how other people respected what she said. So I think that was really important for me to see at that stage in my career because there were so few women in those events and those seminars. So to see that she was able to do that successfully was like, I can do this too. So that was nice.
So like on that note, like the importance of representation, I think, cannot be understated. So obviously, we have goals of trying to increase women in the finance world. I know one term that I am really tired of hearing is finance bro. So like, I guess like in a general, like, how impactful would you say like having that representation was in the early stages of your career?
Extremely, extremely important. Yeah, if I think back on it, she was the only woman that I had exposure to in that field. In the sciences, I had a lot of female professors who I looked up to as role models. I thought they were amazing and also inspired me. But on my possible career path, she was really the only person that I saw. So if she had not been there, I think my belief in myself and the idea or the willingness to pursue that type of career would have been much less than having seen her and see her be successful. So super, super important.
Awesome. And then, so, I mean, we know women in finance face unique challenges that maybe their male counterparts don't. Can you share any experiences where you encountered obstacles due to gender biases and how you may have handled those?
Yeah, so finding role models, I think, was a big challenge. So she wasn't the first person I reached out to try to get some mentorship. I reached out to some other faculty members, male faculty members, older, and they seemed much less interested in putting any effort into my success. They kind of just used me as a research assistant. Here's a task, go do it. I would do my best work, of course, and show it to them, and they'd be like, cool, thanks. Here's the next thing. Not really engaged at all. Um, I also had outside of academia, I entered like a business plan competition my freshman year, and they assigned mentors to the people who are in the business plan competition. And so that guy also very hard to connect with, not interested. So it's tough because I've seen other like male colleagues who reach out to mentors and the mentors are a bit more excited to work with them. They feel more comfortable working with other men and they can connect on things like sports and that finance bro type of stuff. So yeah, that finding a mentor is really tough. And given that there are so few women, you have fewer options.
Mhm.
And then related to that, the networking piece. So networking in finance is crucial. You can't just sit in your office, do good work, and expect to become successful. You need to, grow your network to get those connections and to move up in the ranks and get the best jobs. Um, so I definitely, it was a long time. It took me a long time to figure out how to be comfortable networking. I still struggle with it. But like in we would go to conferences to present papers. So I would present my work or I would discuss another paper. And in the beginning, I would try to, network and talk to new people, maybe older, more established faculty about their research. And it was just so hard to get them to engage in a conversation. It would be, hi, I'm Melina Vosse. I do this type of research. And then they would say, okay, that's nice. And then really quick conversation, they'd move on. So getting to form those connections, very difficult. Um, but I figured out that if I prepared before I went to the conferences and I picked, for example, like a specific session, I would read the papers, I would kind of study a bit and get to know the type of work that the person that I was interested in talking to, what they did. So I could go to the conference and then be more specific with my questions. And that was easier to engage them because then they're like, okay, this person actually is interested and is serious. And they not only read my work, but I would try to connect it to what I'm doing. So then it opens up the potential for collaboration. And then best case scenario is if I could think of a way to like add insight to what they're doing, then that establishes my credibility and I'm really serious, I'm interested. I could potentially be a co-author on this paper, or at the very least, they would reach out to me or um, maybe refer me to somebody else in their network, like, hey, this is somebody that would be decent to work with. I think on the other hand, the less formal networking events are even more challenging because there it's more of like just a social events like cocktail hours or whatever for a group that you're involved in. Um, so there it's more people are connecting on uh, non-professional type of interests. So in a finance specific group, most of the group is probably going to be men um, with interests like sports and golf and those types of things, particularly among the finance people. They feel proud to like those things, so they really want to talk about that. And like the other younger, like I have students and I can tell that they are aspiring to be finance pros. So they've developed their interests to kind of cater to those interests of the more established people. So they'll go in and start talking about that kind of stuff, and it's more they're able to vibe with each other a bit better than when I go in and try to engage in conversation. And I can try to fake being interested in sports, but it's pretty obvious that I'm faking it, and it's hard to get that genuine connection. Um, but I have found a way to get around that. So you can ask more professional questions about like what they do for work, why they find it interesting. Um, a lot of these guys like to talk about themselves. So if you act interested in what they're interested in work wise, then it's they feel good and it's a good way to form a connection, but you also want to be prepared to have your own opinion on things. So now is kind of a good time. There's a lot going on in the financial markets, so you can ask them their views about what's going on, but they'll give you their whole spiel, but make sure you're ready to give your own viewpoints.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's something that's just kind of like innate that we've seen that it's like not only do you have to, prove yourself like academically and professionally, but for introverts as well, like it's just an extra hurdle having to tackle that. Like if you don't have these social connections, it's very hard to make these professional connections. So with that said, we kind of talked a bit about academia, but do you think the industry of finance has evolved in terms of gender diversity? What progress have you seen and what do you think still needs to change?
I think there definitely has been change. Um, Yeah, there definitely has been change. I know it's definitely still not where we need it to be, but it's important to, I think, appreciate the change that has been made. Because if you think about what the world looked like 50 years ago, there's a huge, huge difference. So I think looking at that, appreciating it, and using it as like a source of hope for what's to come, I think that's important. Because it's easy to just sit and feel frustrated about people not listening to you or feeling discriminated against because you're not who they expect in these important meetings or whatever. But yeah, I do think there's been change. Still a lot to be done. So especially if you're working with more senior people, like the older generation, they have this more like traditional subconscious bias that makes it harder for you to get in the door and to feel like your voice is being heard. But among the younger generation, so people that I've talked to and work with who are like, I don't know, 40s, maybe 50s, definitely 40s and younger, it feels like you're on a much more even plane. Definitely feels more like colleagues and peers, and they don't even think about you being a woman. Like it's in a lot of teams that I've worked with younger people, it doesn't, yeah, I don't have the same feeling as when I work with kind of the older generation. Um, there are also, I think this is kind of like academic study stuff, but that recently um, regulations and laws establishing quotas for gender diversity on boards. So that has been beneficial a little bit, I think. So getting women in the upper levels of the leadership in finance and in business. Um, Gender pay gap is still there, but I think it's just gonna take time for the generation to shift so that like in this next upcoming generation, probably the next 10, 15 years or so, we'll have that cohort of more senior women who are going to like hopefully change the culture a little bit and make it easier for younger women starting out to get their feet in the door and feel comfortable and excited and engaged in the finance workforce.
Yeah, and I think that's, a huge initiative that like we've seen is like, trying to change the face of finance, that it's not so male dominated, because obviously it's going to take time, like you said, to get women in those more senior roles. But hopefully once they're there, it's, keeping the ladder there to help those who are just starting out get to those levels and feel more represented and feel like they can go to these networking events and not feel like they need to know everything about basketball and golf in order to make, industry connections. So with that said, let's talk about successes. What's a moment in your career that you are particularly proud of?
Um, so I said that initially I had that imposter syndrome and I didn't have confidence. I kind of sat in the background. But looking back, the growth that I've experienced and being able to feel confident and feel excited about the work that I'm doing and to express that in meetings and with my teams. I think that's something I'm really proud of. Um, and I've also been recognized for that. Like some of the people that I'm still working with, who I started working with back in the PhD program, I'm still working with them on teams and I can feel like I've made my mark and I'm now more of an authority in those teams. So I've had like he's one of the top scholars in the field, like quite well known, and he's said publicly to the team how well I've been doing. So that email is going to be like saved in my something forever. Um, so that was exciting. And then he's also now if he's stuck on something in a project, he'll reach out to me directly and ask my opinion on where we think we should take it and what we can do. And I think it's pretty cool that he trusts me and my knowledge to help him with the project or help him with the problem that he's stuck on. Um, like, yeah. So I think that has really been a confidence booster and a source of success for me. Um, I think, yeah, generally my willingness to ask questions and to say things more assertively across the board in all of the teams that I'm working with, instead of just being shy and saying, maybe we can try this, and then kind of nobody really listens to me. But now I feel comfortable just saying my piece, asking questions. Um, and then just other little work successes. Like I was quoted in a Barron's article recently. I thought that was really cool. And I think one of the biggest successes is having a female student come up to me after one of the semesters a while ago and telling me how much of an impact it made to have a woman as a finance professor because I was the first and only person that she had as a finance professor. So I was really excited and that motivated me to keep doing what I'm doing. So hopefully I can be that for more people.
Yeah, and again, having those successes only kind of fuels our desire to keep at it and just keep adding to those accolades. So you kind of talked about, when you kind of got to the point of like asking questions and speaking up has, kind of increased your confidence. Are there any other strategies that have helped you stand out and succeed in finance, whether that be in academia or industry?
Yeah. So I think it's just generally important to be very engaged about what's happening in not only your line of work or your kind of career focus, but what's happening in the world generally. There's so much going on, so many inputs. So you need to be able to kind of digest and kind of create your own viewpoint from all these inputs so that you can use this viewpoint to make decisions, big decisions in your job or to ask the right questions. So very important to be engaged, keeping up with the news. Like for example, for years and years, every morning when I'm getting ready, I have Bloomberg on in the background and just hearing what they're talking about, what's relevant, what's going on. Yeah, reading news articles and kind of keeping myself excited about what's going on. Sometimes, of course, we just want to rot on the couch and not do anything. That's totally me some days too. But you got to turn on the curiosity light bulb and keep that excitement going internally. Otherwise, if you lose it, you get disengaged. It's hard to form these opinions and to ask the right questions. And your team members and the people that you work with can feel that. Um, so yeah, it's good to exercise that muscle. Um, Asking questions is super key. I know it's hard with that classic imposter syndrome to feel like, am I asking a stupid question? Are they going to think I'm stupid for asking this question? Um, so my advice would be, you have the question, the first one comes up, go through your own due diligence, thinking about it. Can I answer this myself? Just do a little bit of a thought process. And then if not, then it's a totally viable, reasonable question to ask. Right? And if they think you're stupid for asking that question, that's probably a signal that they're not a great person to work with. Or they're just going to forget it and move on, and hopefully you get your question answered. But asking questions also shows that you're interested. Asking good questions shows that you are, going to create something meaningful because you're curious and you want to do something new that will make a difference. Kind of related to that, so bringing together, being able to form a view of the world based on your engagement and your understanding of what's going on. Try to be a bit contrarian, meaning don't take what you see or what you've heard as given. Always kind of question if that's the best we can do, or is this always the way it needs to be? Because if you think, like somebody says, this is the way it's always been done, why does it have to be that way? Can you potentially change it? And by having an understanding of what's going on in the world, you are able to feel confident in your other option potentially being meaningful and making a difference. So don't be afraid to be contrarian. And that's why we have teams. If it's not a great idea, you'll sort through it and maybe you don't go with it. But that's fine. It's good to at least try to bring that idea into the space because you never know what could come of it. Another one is to just focus on your emotional intelligence. I feel like women kind of have more of a skill usually when it comes to emotional intelligence. So finance and all of the business world is a connections oriented business. So use that skill to your advantage, being able to read the room and know how to say things to certain people. Just try to use that advantage because some people might not have that skill and it might put them at a lower kind of position than you might be with that skill.
Yeah, absolutely. And, so many of our attendees here are either early in their careers in finance or, just considering this path, just to begin with. What key skills do you think are going to be essential for women to excel in this industry?
You need to have grit. So grit meaning you need to have perseverance and you need to have that passion for what you are doing because it is competitive and it is a difficult field to make your way in. So you will encounter difficulties and failures. So you can't let those setbacks make you believe that this isn't the career or the field for you. So if you know that you're passionate about, you know, the world of finance, which I am, it's a super cool field to be involved in and to think about as a job. Um, just keep that excitement and keep that end goal in mind, and don't let those things kind of get you down and make you feel like you don't belong. So you need to have that grit. That's definitely important. I'm going to say ask questions again because it's very important. People told me this when I was younger, and for some reason it didn't stick. I was still too scared to ask questions, but keep asking questions, expressing curiosity. If you're curious, then people will, it's a signal to people that you care and that you are potentially going to do a good job because you just naturally want to get involved and think about solving those types of questions or problems. Um, One thing that I've seen people struggle with is when they face biases potentially due to gender or race or something, I've seen people get either defensive, so they take this feeling of frustration and injustice, which is totally valid because it's not fair and people shouldn't be treating you that way. But the response can be it doesn't always serve the purpose of what you're trying to accomplish. So try not to take things personally. People say rude things or express these biases not because you're a bad person, but because they have insecurities themselves or they have trouble dealing with something that is not meeting their expectations. So don't take it personally. Just try to calmly tell yourself it's not about me. I know I do good work. I'm a good person. And then say, for example, if it's somebody that just constantly is dismissing your ideas in a meeting, don't take it personally that your ideas aren't good. Just try to brush it off and continue to assert that opinion. Say, oh, based on what I mentioned last week, what if we try this? Just keep going about it that way instead of trying to ram people into the ground for doing something that, it's not just something you're doing. It could be due to their own insecurities um, and their own things that they're dealing with. So I've seen people react that way. I've also seen people when they run into these kind of frictions in the workforce or in teams that they just close in on themselves and let imposter syndrome take over and say, well, it's not fair and no one's going to listen. No one's going to listen to me anyways. So I'm just not going to say anything. So also don't do that. So just again, whatever other people are doing, you can't control that. It could be unjust, it could be unfair, it could be rude, but if your goal is to find success in your career and to grow as a woman in business, you have to just kind of take it off the cuff and continue to assert yourself and do good work. It can be extremely difficult, but what I've seen other people do, like Millie, my mentor, um, I think she handled it pretty well, and just continuing to assert her opinions and not let people kind of grind her down.
And I think, these are fantastic tidbits. And I think one of the last questions I have for you is just going to be, knowing where you're at right now, all you've achieved and how far you've come. What piece of advice would you give to women who are looking to advocate for themselves and grow in these specifically male-dominated spaces?
Um, yeah, it's super difficult, and I'm still early in my career, so I'm sure there's much more that I will encounter and new difficulties that I'm gonna face. But I would say that you need to start with a strong foundation. So being confident in yourself and your capabilities, if you go into the world, into your job with that confidence and the belief that you can do good work, you can make a significant contribution, then you'll be able to have that presence to kind of work through the possible biases or that resistance that you might face down the line. That's easier said than done, of course. I'm still, of course, not perfect and still learning. But I think if you have that starting foundation of confidence and assuredness in yourself, you'll have the tools to navigate dealing with difficult people and difficult situations. That's if it's just kind of subconscious biases, people aren't listening to you or maybe dismissing you. If you run into instances where it's more of an aggressive bias, which luckily I have not encountered, but I do know people who have. So, meaning um, like more direct discrimination and kind of people who are asserting dominance over you in a threatening way. It has happened to people that I know. So in that case, you can't just sit there and be confident and hope it goes away. Then you need to hopefully find a senior mentor in your team and talk through it with them to see how you can handle it. It is very difficult. It depends on the culture that you're in. So in some cultures, speaking up could end up hurting you, unfortunately. Then like it could lead to more tension in the workplace and you could end up isolating yourself. So if you're in that type of culture, very difficult. Or if you're in a culture where you have a senior teammate or a senior colleague who's maybe not directly on your project, but you know that they have some power in the organization and they can advocate for you, definitely try to find that life raft if you can. Um, but then if you don't, you really need to ask yourself, is this the type of organization that I want to be a part of? Is it worth sticking it out here if I'm going to be facing this type of discrimination and this kind of toxic work environment? Because it's possible that you might find yourself in that type of organization. So some people kind of justify it as this is a really um, top firm and a lot of good connections, and this is really good for my career. But going to work every day is a struggle because you have to deal with terrible people. So that's the question you really need to ask yourself: is it worth it? Like, life is short. And then ideally in equilibrium, those types of firms will lose valuable women who do good work and then they're going to suffer. And then the firms with the better culture will win. So yeah, it's a tricky question, but that's just my 2 cents.
A tricky world to navigate for sure. Melina, thank you so much for sharing those insights into your background and your experiences. I know personally it's been really, just helpful to kind of hear about, the path you've walked and kind of how you've gotten here. So with that said, this is our time for some Q&A. So if any of our attendees here have any questions that they want to ask Melina, this is your time to unmute yourself and get these questions answered.
Hi, Melina. I was just curious, what drove your decision to continue in academia rather than going into industry?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think the main driver of my decision was the lifestyle of academia compared to industry. So I am not really a fan of living on someone else's schedule and explicitly being told what to do. So industry, I know starting out, like as an analyst, for example, you live by someone's schedule, you have to do sending emails and working on projects that someone else tells you to work on. That was not really the life that I wanted to live. So in academia, I still get to be involved in the industry in pieces, but I have the flexibility to work on projects that I want to work on, think about questions that I'm interested in, and just have a lot more flexibility with my life. So that was why. It's not easy. The PhD program was torture, but it was worth it, I think, for my personality.
Got it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jenny. Do we have any other questions at this time? All right. Well, with that said, should any of you guys have any further questions, I'd be more than happy to connect you with Melina, to get you, insights answered about, being a woman in finance. So with that said, before we wrap up, Melina, do you have any final thoughts or just words of encouragement for women pursuing careers in finance?
Yeah, sure. If you are passionate about it and you like the field, don't give up. It's going to be possibly a hard road, but try to find mentors. I'm happy to like talk to you more and potentially serve as a mentor as well. So just keep going and it'll be worth it. It's a really fulfilling and interesting field. So yeah, if you believe it, you can do it. So yeah, we need more young women in the field. So please.
Yes, we absolutely need more young women in the field. So with that, I wanted to mention that if you are interested in deepening your expertise in finance and gaining the tools to advance your career and want to help contribute to the movement to bring more women to the finance industry, the Master of Science in Finance program here at Knauss is a great option. Melina can attest to this as she teaches corporate finance and advanced corporate finance for this program. So I'll be following with everybody here regardless. But should you like more information on this, I'm more than happy to answer any questions that you have. Just shoot me an email. We can get your questions answered. So with that said, Melina, thank you for sharing your words of encouragement and your experiences. Before we wrap up, looks like we have one more question. Are there any books or podcasts that have helped you overcome imposter syndrome?
It's a good question. I wish there were. Are there anything? I mean, I think a book that made an impact on me, not specific to imposter syndrome, but it's called Grit by Angela Duckworth. Um, I don't know, I feel like it made an impact and might have helped build confidence and that like push through type of attitude. Um, but yeah. If you send me an email, maybe I can think of something and I'll follow up with you later.
Awesome. Thanks, Marcella, for that question. And again, thank you all for attending today. It really does mean a lot to see, so much interest in, changing the face of finance to benefit women. So Melina, again, thank you for your expertise and your time today. And I hope everyone has a fantastic rest of their afternoon. All right.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you guys for coming.
Of course. Bye, everyone.